I'm not the kind of guy who overthinks small coincidences. Life's chaotic enough, so I leave the worrying to others. But recently, something started to gnaw at me, a subtle, persistent itch I couldn't quite scratch. It began with our family Tesla. If you own one of these cars, you know they're a marvel of modern engineering, barely need any maintenance. Ours had been a solid runner until 2 weeks ago, when it suddenly turned temperamental. First, there was an issue with the maps, nothing major, but my wife, Lisa, insisted it needed immediate attention. Then, just a few days later, she had a minor accident at the mall. Barely a scratch, she said, but suddenly the sensors were all out of whack. Another trip to the service center. And then, last week, the car shut down completely while she was on her way to visit her sister. Yet another visit. Tesla's a drama queen, Lisa joked when she came home that night. I laughed along, but something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. Sure, things break, even in fancy cars, but this was a lot. And all within 2 weeks? A Tesla's not a 20-year-old beater. What were the odds? Maybe it was the look in her eyes when she explained why she had to go to the service center again. There was a flicker of something, not guilt exactly, but not the ease I was used to seeing in her. It was like she was trying a little too hard to convince me it was all normal. Still, I didn't press her. We'd been married for 11 years, had 2 kids, and for all our ups and downs, I trusted her. If she said the car needed fixing, who was I to argue? Besides, we had other things to worry about: school pickups, bills, my insane work hours. Life rolls on. That night, as she settled in next to me, she asked, "Do you think we should just trade it in for a new one? Maybe it's a lemon." I shrugged. "It's under warranty, and you've already spent so much time getting it sorted. Let's wait and see." "Fair enough," she murmured, her gaze drifting to her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I caught the faintest smirk before she tucked it under her pillow and kissed me goodnight. The itch returned. Something felt off, but I had no proof, just a gut feeling that wouldn't let go. The next morning, Lisa was out the door early. She claimed she had a full day: errands, groceries, maybe a stop at her favorite coffee shop before picking up the kids. "Don't forget the Tesla appointment," I reminded her. "I won't," she said, her tone breezy but just a tad too casual. "You know me, always on top of things." I watched from the window as she climbed into the car and drove off. It was all perfectly normal, too normal. And that's when I realized I couldn't even pinpoint why I was suddenly suspicious. But it was there, lurking under the surface, like static in the background. At work, I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to the Tesla and Lisa's newfound obsession with the service center. After lunch, I texted her to ask how the appointment was going. "All good," she replied almost instantly. "Super busy here, so it's taking a while." Her efficiency at texting didn't escape me. Normally, she'd take hours to reply during the day. Weird. On a whim, I called the Tesla service center later that afternoon. A polite woman answered, and I asked about our car. "Oh, yes," she said, scrolling through what I assumed was a digital ledger. "It's here now. Routine diagnostics." "Great," I said, my heart oddly heavy. "By the way, do you have a regular tech who works on it?" There was a pause. "Yes, one of our senior technicians has been handling your vehicle. His name's Kevin. He's excellent, Tesla certified, very thorough." "Kevin, huh? Sounds like a pro. Has he worked on it before?" "Yes, he handled the last 2 visits as well." I thanked her and hung up, unsure what to do with the information. Kevin. A Tesla technician. Maybe it was nothing, but my mind had already decided to go rogue, spinning scenarios I didn't want to entertain. When Lisa came home that evening, she seemed lighter, more animated than usual. She kissed me on the cheek, something she hadn't done in weeks. "I'm making pasta tonight," she announced. "You're overdue for a proper meal." Dinner was good, and the kids were in a great mood. On the surface, everything felt fine, like the picture-perfect family life we used to have. But beneath the surface, I was swimming in questions. That night, while Lisa showered, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone. It was right there, screen locked. I knew the passcode, she hadn't changed it in years. The thought of snooping felt dirty, but then again, the thought of being blindsided felt worse. I grabbed the phone and punched in the code. Nothing looked out of place, just the usual texts from friends, school emails, and shopping receipts. I was about to put it down when I noticed her Maps app. A recent search popped up. Coffee shop. A location I didn't recognize. Curious, I clicked it open. The address wasn't anywhere near the service center. My stomach flipped. Maybe she was meeting a friend. There was nothing wrong with that. But then, why not just tell me? Hey! Lisa's voice cut through the quiet, and I jumped, nearly dropping the phone. She was standing in the doorway, towel wrapped around her. What are you doing? Just setting an alarm. I lied, fumbling to lock the screen. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press me either. Instead, she climbed into bed and curled up with her back to me. The smell of her shampoo filled the room, a fragrance I'd loved for years, but tonight it only added to the growing knot in my gut. I lay awake long after she'd fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and piecing things together. There was nothing concrete, nothing damning, just the stray threads of something wrong, weaving into a pattern I couldn't yet see. By morning I knew one thing for certain. I needed to find out who Kevin really was. The next day, Lisa's schedule seemed busier than ever. After dropping the kids at school, she mentioned something about running errands and maybe stopping by the mall. Anything you need while I'm out? She asked, casually slipping her bag over her shoulder. No, I'm good, I replied, sipping my coffee and watching her carefully. Text me if you need anything. She nodded, flashing that same easy smile. Then she was gone. Instead of heading straight to work, I decided to take the morning off. I told my boss I wasn't feeling great, which wasn't entirely untrue. I had a knot in my stomach that wouldn't quit. Once Lisa left the neighborhood, I grabbed my keys and followed at a distance, keeping her taillights just in view. I felt ridiculous, like some amateur sleuth in a bad movie, but I couldn't shake the need to see for myself. If nothing was going on, I'd laugh about this later. But if something was going on... Lisa's first stop was the coffee shop from the Maps search. She parked out front, and I pulled into a lot across the street. She walked in with her phone in hand, glancing at the screen. A few minutes later, a man arrived, tall, with dark hair and wearing a Tesla service uniform. Kevin, I assumed. They hugged. Not a quick, casual hug either. It lingered, just long enough to make my blood run cold. I snapped a picture from my car. It felt intrusive, but I needed to document what I was seeing. My hands shook as I lowered the phone. My heart raced, and I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I told myself there could be an innocent explanation. Maybe they were friends. Maybe this was part of some customer service program Tesla had rolled out. But deep down, I knew better. After about 20 minutes, they left the coffee shop. Lisa got into the Tesla, and Kevin climbed into a black sedan parked a few spaces down. I waited until she drove off before following Kevin instead. His car led me across town to an industrial park. He pulled into a lot marked Tesla Service Center. It was definitely his workplace. He got out, grabbed his bag from the back seat, and walked inside. Nothing overtly suspicious there. But I wasn't done. I parked nearby and Googled the center, finding their employee directory. It took some digging, but I found Kevin's LinkedIn profile. He'd been with Tesla for 4 years, specializing in diagnostics and software updates. Single. No spouse or kids mentioned. His profile picture showed him smiling, the kind of guy who probably charmed his way through life. I sat there for a while, debating my next move. Confronting Lisa outright wouldn't work, I needed more proof. And following Kevin wasn't likely to yield anything concrete. I decided to dig into the car itself. If there was something to find, it would be there. Later that evening, while Lisa was upstairs getting ready for bed, I grabbed the Tesla's keys and headed to the garage. I plugged in my laptop, hoping to access the car's diagnostic logs. Tesla's systems are notoriously secure, but with a little persistence, I managed to pull up the recent service history. As expected, Kevin's name was listed as the technician for the last 3 visits. But it was the timestamps that caught my attention. The service records showed work starting hours later than the times Lisa claimed to have been at the center. One visit logged only 30 minutes of actual diagnostics but stretched across 3 hours. "What are you doing?" Lisa's voice startled me, and I spun around to find her standing in the doorway. "Just checking on the car," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I thought the diagnostics might still be active from the last visit." She raised an eyebrow. "Why? Is something wrong?" "No," I said quickly. "Just curious." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly, but then she smiled. "You're such a tech geek. Let me know if you find anything." I nodded, watching her retreat into the house. Once the door closed, I let out a shaky breath. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. There were too many pieces that didn't fit. And now, I was determined to find out exactly what Lisa and Kevin were up to. Over the next few days, I became a man possessed. I combed through every scrap of data I could find: Lisa's phone, the Tesla's logs, even her calendar entries. I had to be careful, though. Lisa wasn't stupid. If she suspected I was onto her, she'd change her patterns, and I'd lose whatever thread I was pulling. On Wednesday, she announced another trip to the Tesla service center. "The parking sensors are still acting weird," she said over breakfast. "I called Kevin, the tech. He said he could squeeze me in after lunch." My stomach churned when she mentioned his name. "Hope it's nothing major," I replied evenly. "Want me to swing by later and pick up the car if it takes too long?" "No need," she said, shaking her head. "I'll be fine." She kissed me on the cheek and left soon after, leaving me alone with a nagging sense of unease. I debated following her again but decided against it. Instead, I focused on tracking her movements through the Tesla app. I'd set up remote access a while back, so I could see the car's location in real time. At 1:15 p.m., she parked at the Tesla service center. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The car didn't move, and the logs showed no diagnostic session had been initiated. At 1:40, the location pinged again, this time at a nearby motel. My chest tightened. A motel. Of all the places she could have gone. The app showed the car parked there for the next hour, motionless. I felt a burning mix of anger and dread. This was it, wasn't it? The confirmation I'd been dreading. I drove there. It felt reckless, but I couldn't just sit at home, staring at the screen. When I arrived, I parked a block away and walked toward the motel, heart pounding with every step. The Tesla was there, unmistakable. I scanned the lot and spotted Kevin's black sedan parked a few spaces away. I circled the building, keeping to the shadows, until I found their room. I didn't know what I expected to see. Maybe the blinds open, some cliched moment of betrayal played out like a bad soap opera. But the curtains were drawn tight, and the world outside was eerily quiet. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, torn between anger and despair. Finally, I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the 2 cars side by side. It wasn't much, but it was something, a piece of the puzzle I was slowly assembling. Back at home, Lisa was in high spirits when she returned. "Everything's sorted now," she said, setting her bag down. "Kevin said the sensors just needed a software recalibration." I nodded, masking my emotions as best I could. "Glad to hear it." But inside, I was seething. Her lie was so casual, so effortless. It took everything I had not to confront her right then and there. Instead, I focused on the plan forming in my mind. I needed solid, undeniable proof, something she couldn't talk her way out of. The next day, I called the Tesla service center, pretending to be a prospective client interested in their diagnostics services. I asked how long a typical recalibration took. "Usually about 30 minutes, the receptionist said. "It's a quick procedure." "Does it ever take longer?" I pressed. "Not really," she replied. "Unless there's additional damage, but we'd note that in the service records." I thanked her and hung up, my suspicions hardening into certainty. Lisa and Kevin weren't just meeting during these service visits, they were using them as cover. But what were they doing during those extended sessions at the motel? I could guess, but I needed confirmation. That evening, I installed a discreet GPS tracker under the Tesla's rear bumper. If she went anywhere suspicious again, I'd have the data. And next time, I wouldn't just be watching, I'd be ready. The GPS tracker worked flawlessly. I monitored Lisa's movements over the next few days, watching her trips to the grocery store, the kids' school, and her occasional stops at her favorite boutique. Everything seemed routine, too routine, like she was purposefully keeping her days boring. But I knew it wouldn't last. The tension inside me coiled tighter with each passing hour. Then came Friday afternoon. Lisa announced she was heading back to the service center because, apparently, there's a firmware update Kevin forgot to install. She rolled her eyes as if it were just another inconvenience, grabbed her purse, and kissed me on the cheek. I watched her leave, then checked the GPS app on my phone. She was headed straight to the service center, as expected. But I didn't relax. This time, I had a plan. I called a buddy of mine, Eric, who worked as a private investigator. We weren't close, but he owed me a favor after I'd helped him get a great deal on a car for his wife last year. I explained the situation in broad strokes, leaving out some of the more humiliating details. "Think you can shadow her?" I asked. Eric hesitated. "Yeah, I can do that. Might cost you a six-pack, though." "Deal." Eric was on the case. I stayed home, glued to my phone, tracking the GPS in real time. At 1:30, Lisa's car pinged at the service center. By 1:50, it had moved, straight to the same motel. My chest tightened as I called Eric to confirm. "She just pulled into the motel lot," he said. "She's not alone. Looks like a guy in a Tesla uniform is with her." "Kevin." I swallowed hard, my voice catching. "Can you get anything? Pictures, video, whatever you can." "Already on it," Eric replied. "Hang tight." I hung up, my heart racing. The next hour felt like a lifetime. I paced the living room, my mind running wild with possibilities. What would I say? What would I do? Every scenario felt worse than the last. At 2:45, Eric called back. "Got what you need," he said. "They're leaving now. Want me to follow?" "No," I said quickly. "I'll handle it." He hesitated. "You sure?" "I can keep tabs." I said I'll handle it. I snapped, immediately regretting my tone. "Sorry." "Thanks, Eric." "I owe you?" "You owe me big," he muttered, then hung up. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, Eric's words echoing in my head. "Got what you need." I wasn't ready to look at the evidence yet, but I knew I'd have to face it soon. When Lisa walked through the door later, she seemed perfectly at ease. "Firmware's all updated," she announced cheerfully, setting her keys on the counter. "Kevin says it should be smooth sailing from here." I forced a smile. "That's good to hear." We went through the motions of dinner and bedtime for the kids, but I'd barely registered any of it. My mind was elsewhere, replaying Eric's words and dreading what came next. After the kids were asleep, Lisa climbed into bed with her phone, scrolling through social media like everything was fine. "Long day," she said with a yawn. "I'm wiped." "Me too," I replied, my voice flat. "Good night." She was asleep within minutes. I waited until her breathing was steady, then slipped out of bed and into the living room. My laptop was on the coffee table, along with the USB drive Eric had dropped off earlier. I plugged it in, took a deep breath, and opened the file. The photos were clear and undeniable, Lisa and Kevin walking into the motel room together, holding hands. A shot of their cars side by side in the lot. And worst of all, a short video clip of them leaving the room an hour later, laughing like teenagers. I stared at the screen, numb. There it was, the truth I'd been chasing. No more doubts, no more excuses. Lisa was cheating on me, and Kevin was her partner in crime. For a moment, all I could do was sit there, my hands trembling. Then, slowly, a cold clarity settled over me. I wasn't going to confront her tonight, not while I was still raw. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to see this coming. I spent the next 2 days in a fog of cold calculation. Lisa went about her weekend like nothing was wrong, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I could barely look at her without my blood boiling, but I forced myself to play along, smiling, nodding, pretending everything was fine. It wasn't easy, but I had a plan. Monday morning, after Lisa dropped the kids at school, I made my move. I called her and asked if she could meet me for lunch at our favorite cafe. She hesitated at first but eventually agreed. "Everything okay?" she asked. "You sound weird." "Just want to spend some time with you," I replied, keeping my voice light. "It's been a while since we had a proper date." She laughed softly. "All right, I'll see you there at noon." When she arrived, I was already seated, a coffee in front of me and my laptop open. She slid into the chair across from me, her smile warm and unsuspecting. "This is a nice surprise," she said, setting her purse down. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I said, closing the laptop and leaning forward. "Just felt like catching up. How's your day going?" "Busy as always," she replied, sipping her coffee. "You? Oh, you know, the usual," I said. Then, without missing a beat, I added, "I've been looking into Tesla diagnostics." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Diagnostics? Why?" "Just curious," I said casually. "Like, how long does a firmware update usually take? Because I heard it's about 30 minutes tops." Her smile faltered for the briefest moment before she recovered. "That sounds about right." "Why?" "No reason," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It's just interesting how your last few appointments seem to take a lot longer than that." She froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "What are you getting at?" I met her gaze, my voice calm but cold. "I know about Kevin. And the motel." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting around the cafe as if searching for an escape. Then she set the cup down, her hands trembling. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I opened the laptop, spinning it around so she could see the screen. The photos Eric had taken stared back at her, damning, undeniable. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Lisa," I said quietly, "don't insult me by pretending this isn't what it looks like." Tears welled in her eyes, and she looked down at her hands. I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I barked a laugh, startling her. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been sneaking around for weeks, maybe longer. How exactly do you not mean for that to happen?" She reached across the table, her voice desperate. "Please let me explain." "No," I said sharply, pulling my hand away. "I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, then looked down, her voice barely audible. "A couple of months." I nodded, the confirmation hitting harder than I expected. "Why, Lisa? Was it me? Was I not enough for you?" Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "It wasn't like that. You've been amazing. I don't even know why, I just—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence stretch between us. Then I stood, closing the laptop and tucking it under my arm. "I'll be staying with my brother for a few days," I said, my voice flat. "I need time to figure out what's next. Don't bother calling me. Please," she sobbed, grabbing my arm. "We can fix this. I love you." I looked down at her hand, then back at her tear-streaked face. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." With that, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind. As I stepped into the sunlight, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let her or Kevin define it for me. The days following my confrontation with Lisa were a blur of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I stayed at my brother Tim's place, sleeping on his couch and trying to process everything. Tim, ever the straight shooter, didn't mince words when I told him the full story. "She played you, man," he said, handing me a beer. "But you've got the upper hand now. You've got evidence. Use it." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The reality of my situation was sinking in, but every time I thought about what to do next, my emotions got the better of me. I wasn't ready to file for divorce, not yet. I needed more time, more clarity. Lisa called and texted constantly, but I didn't answer. Her messages ranged from tearful apologies to desperate pleas for a chance to explain. But the more she tried, the less inclined I felt to listen. She'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. On the third day, I met with a lawyer. His office was small but professional, with certificates lining the walls. He listened patiently as I laid out the situation, nodding as I showed him the photos and videos. "This is solid evidence," he said, leaning back in his chair. "If you want to pursue divorce, this will give you leverage, especially if there are financial entanglements. Do you own your home together?" "Yes," I said. "And we've got 2 kids." He nodded again, scribbling notes. "Custody might get tricky, but with evidence like this, you'll have a strong case. I'll need to know more about your finances, but based on what you've told me, you should be in a good position." I left his office feeling marginally better. At least now I had a plan, even if it wasn't the one I'd envisioned when I married Lisa all those years ago. That evening, I decided it was time to confront her again, this time about the practicalities of what came next. I didn't tell her I was coming home. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The kids were with my parents for the night, so it was just Lisa. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with her phone. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and she immediately put the phone down. "You came back," she said, her voice trembling. "For now," I replied, standing in the doorway. "We need to talk." She nodded, gesturing for me to sit. I stayed where I was. "I met with a lawyer," I said bluntly. "I'm considering filing for divorce." Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands. "Please don't do this," she sobbed. "I'll do anything to fix this. Just tell me what you want." "What I want," I said, my voice cold, "is for you to explain how you could throw away everything we built together for a fling with some car tech. It wasn't like that," she said through her tears. "Kevin, he made me feel wanted. Special." My stomach churned. "Special? Lisa, I've spent years working my ass off to give you and the kids a good life. Was that not enough?" "It's not about that," she cried. I was stupid, okay? I made a mistake. But it didn't mean anything. I swear." I let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't mean anything? You lied to me, to our kids. You snuck around like a teenager. It meant enough for you to risk our family." She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking. "But I can't lose you. I can't lose us. Please." I stared at her for a long moment, torn between anger and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that we could somehow get past this. But another part of me, the part that had spent sleepless nights piecing together her betrayal, knew better. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But for now, I'm staying at Tim's. We need some space." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Okay. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes." I left without another word, the door closing behind me with a heavy thud. As I drove back to Tim's, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the one I'd been handed. And now, it was up to me to decide how to move forward. Lisa's tearful pleas stayed with me, replaying in my mind during sleepless nights on Tim's couch. As much as I hated to admit it, a small part of me wanted to believe her. Could it really have been just a moment of stupidity? Could our marriage survive this? But then I remembered the photos, the lies, and the motel visits. Those weren't mistakes, they were choices. and she made them over and over again. I decided I needed more clarity before taking any drastic steps. I reached out to Eric once more, asking him to dig into Kevin's background. If I was going to unravel this mess, I needed the full picture. Eric called me 3 days later, his tone grim. "You're not going to like this. Just tell me," I said, bracing myself. "Kevin's got a bit of a track record," he said. "There's no official paper trail, no arrests or anything, but I found a couple of women who used to date him. Both say he's a serial cheater. One of them mentioned he has a habit of getting involved with married women." My grip tightened on the phone. "So he's done this before?" "Seems like it," Eric confirmed. "One of the women said he's a charmer, says all the right things, makes you feel like the center of his world. But it never lasts. He moves on as soon as the thrill wears off." I thanked Eric and hung up, my anger simmering. Kevin wasn't just some guy who happened to get close to Lisa. He was a predator, someone who sought out vulnerabilities and exploited them. But that didn't absolve Lisa. She let him in, allowed him to worm his way into our lives. That night I went back home. Not to reconcile, but to confront Lisa one last time with everything I'd learned. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up, startled, and then her face softened into a tentative smile. "You're home," she said cautiously. "For now," I replied, setting my bag down. "We need to talk." She set the knife down and turned to face me, her expression wary. "Okay. What's on your mind?" "Kevin," I said bluntly. "I did some digging. Turns out you're not the first married woman he's been involved with." Her face went pale, and she sank into a chair. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Didn't you?" I shot back. "Or did you just not care?" She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. "I swear I didn't know. He made me feel important, like I mattered. I didn't think about anything else." "You didn't think about me," I said, my voice rising. "Or the kids. Or the life we built together." She sobbed into her hands, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But it was quickly swallowed by the anger and betrayal I'd been carrying for weeks. "Do you even love him?" I asked harshly. "No," she cried, looking up at me. "It was never about love. It was stupid and selfish, and I regret it more than anything. Please believe me." I stared at her, searching her tear-streaked face for any sign of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Maybe she was still there, buried under the lies and mistakes. Or maybe I was clinging to a fantasy that no longer existed. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She stood and reached for me, her voice desperate. "We can fix this. Please, just give me a chance." I took a step back, holding up a hand to stop her. "I need time. Don't push me." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll wait. However long it takes." I left her standing there, broken and sobbing, and drove aimlessly for hours, trying to quiet the storm in my mind. Every memory of our life together was now tainted by her betrayal. I couldn't escape the question that haunted me: was there any way to rebuild what she had destroyed? The weeks following that confrontation were some of the hardest of my life. Lisa gave me space, keeping her distance while trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the kids. I stayed at Tim's most nights, only coming home when absolutely necessary. Each time I saw her, the pain of her betrayal felt fresh, like a wound that refused to heal. The kids were starting to notice my absence. Jeremy, our eldest, asked why I wasn't home more often. I didn't have a good answer for him. "Just busy with work," I lied, ruffling his hair. He nodded, but the confusion in his eyes gutted me. I couldn't keep putting off the inevitable. I needed to make a decision, for my sake and for the kids. One evening, I met with the lawyer again. I laid everything out: the evidence, my doubts, my fears about how this would affect Jeremy and Emma. He listened patiently before offering his advice. "You're not the first person to face this, and you won't be the last," he said. If you want to fight for your marriage, that's your choice. But if you choose to end it, you're in a strong position. You've got the evidence to ensure a fair outcome, both financially and in terms of custody. That night, I went home, determined to have one final conversation with Lisa. She was in the living room, flipping through a photo album. When I walked in, she looked up, her eyes red from crying. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. "We need to talk," I replied, sitting down across from her. She nodded, closing the album and setting it aside. "Okay." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what you did and what it means for our family. And I've realized something." She leaned forward, clutching her hands together. "What?" "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't keep pretending that things can go back to the way they were. You broke something in me, Lisa. Something I don't think I can ever fix." Her face crumpled, and she began to sob. "Please don't say that. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, the tears welling up in my own eyes. "It's not just about what you did. It's about the lies, the deception, the choices you made to put yourself before us. I can't live with that. And I can't raise our kids in a house built on broken trust." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "What about the kids?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They need you. We need you. They'll always have me," I said firmly. "I'll do everything I can to be a good father to them. But I can't stay in this marriage." Her sobs turned into wails, and I had to look away. The sight of her broken and begging was almost too much to bear. But I knew in my heart that I was making the right choice. "I'll talk to the lawyer tomorrow," I said, standing. "We'll figure out custody and how to move forward. But this is the end, Lisa. I'm sorry." She didn't respond, just buried her face in her hands as I walked out the door. As I drove away, a strange sense of relief washed over me. It wasn't joy or triumph, just a quiet certainty that I was finally taking control of my life again. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. And for now, that was enough. The days following my decision were a blur of legal meetings, difficult conversations, and adjusting to the reality of my new life. Lisa and I agreed to share custody of the kids, alternating weeks, and I moved into a small rental house not far from their school. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom with outdated appliances and creaky floors, but it was mine. The kids took the news as well as could be expected. Jeremy was quiet, asking a lot of questions about why I was leaving and if I still loved them. Emma, still too young to fully understand, cried when I explained that I wouldn't be living with them every day. "But I'll see you all the time," I promised, hugging her tightly. "And we'll have so much fun when you stay with me. It's going to be okay." Lisa tried her best to put on a brave face during the transition, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. She sent long, heartfelt texts late at night, apologizing again and again, asking for another chance. I stopped responding. I couldn't keep rehashing the same arguments. The decision was made. One evening, as I was unpacking boxes in my new place, Tim dropped by with a 6-pack and a pizza. "How you holding up?" he asked, plopping down on the couch. "Better than I thought I'd be," I admitted. "It's weird, you know? Starting over. But it feels clean. Like I can breathe again." He nodded, taking a swig of his beer. "Good. You deserve that." We talked for hours that night, reminiscing about old times and making plans for the future. It was the first time in weeks that I felt like myself again, like I wasn't defined by what Lisa had done. Over time, I found a new rhythm. The kids adjusted to the custody arrangement, and I worked hard to make my new house a home for them. We baked cookies, built blanket forts, and spent weekends exploring parks and museums. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. As for Lisa, I kept things civil for the kids' sake, but I maintained my distance. She continued to text occasionally, but her messages became less frequent as the months passed. Eventually, she stopped altogether. One evening, Jeremy came to me with a school project, a family tree. As we filled in the branches, he looked up at me and asked, "Are we still a family, even though you and Mom aren't married?" The question caught me off guard, but I smiled and ruffled his hair. "Of course we are, buddy. A family isn't about living in the same house or being married. It's about love. And I'll always love you and your sister, no matter what." He nodded, satisfied with my answer, and we went back to drawing the tree. In that moment, I realized something important. Lisa's betrayal had changed my life, but it hadn't destroyed it. I was still a father, still a man with a future worth fighting for. The scars of her infidelity would always be there, but they didn't define me. I was stronger than the pain, and for the first time in a long time, I was hopeful for what lay ahead.